Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Madam Acting Deputy President. So I'll continue the remarks that I was making the other day before we jump to the tax bill. This bill's got quite far-reaching consequences in that what it's doing really is extending the mandate of ASIO to allow it to conduct telecommunications intercepts on behalf of other agencies, which I think is actually quite troubling. As I was saying the other day, ASIO operates under fairly strict rules of engagement, if you will, and those are necessary. They've evolved over a long period of time in the post-war period. And the reason for that really is if we admit that we need clandestine intelligence agencies in Australia, then there's immediately a tension there between what they do on our behalf with taxpayers' money in order to ostensibly provide for the safety of Australians here and overseas, and the needs for promotion of democratic transparency. And as I said the other day, I've met across an estimates table with the Director General, Mr. Irvine, on a number of occasions. And he's forced effectively by his act to be politely dismissive of the questions that we put to him about what the agency actually does. We're referred back to the Act, we're referred to the fact that there's oversight by the Director-General of Intelligence and Security, but we're not, the Parliament, through the estimates committees and through the other tools of accountability that we have access to in here on behalf of our constituents, we're not actually able to find out very much about what this agency does. There is a degree of opacity, I suppose, and the agency and the Minister argues that this is necessary. In fact, by definition, this is how ASIO needs to act and to organise itself, and not just ASIO but the rest of the intelligence community. No greater, I suppose, a symptom of this form of thinking than in the freedom of information reforms that went through this place late last year. We simply provided blanket immunity from FOI, from ASIO and other intelligence and security agencies. So you can't even request their paperclip inventory under Freedom of Information Act anymore, because everything is simply shrouded under this mantle of national security. Not even the CIA or British intelligence agencies are immune or completely exempt from freedom of information. But that's the kind of thinking that dominates in Australia, where we think these agencies somehow have secrets which are so important that any imposition at all is completely out of order and somehow places our national security in jeopardy. I'll note that the budget of ASIO has expanded. So while the rest of the Commonwealth Public Service has been on some kind of efficiency drive, ASIO, in fact, is headed in the other direction. The Parliamentary Library provided us with a good budget review of 2010-11 on ASIO and on related intelligence issues, and we've seen several years of compounding growth in ASIO, both in its budget, in its staff, obviously in the extraordinary fortress which is under construction on the shores of the lake, and so now that the total budget, I think, from $427 million in the 09-10 budget is now approaching around $717 million, and of course we await breathlessly to find out what the budget will be in the 11-12 period. And so we've got an agency with an important mandate, national security, with a rapidly expanding budget and with a rapidly expanding staff that's about to go into its new home, and yet somehow we're meant to simply pass this bill today, and I understand that the opposition will be supporting it here as they did in the House of Representatives, without any essential justification for why we are so dramatically expanding its mandate. Not simply that takes it outside of its area when it's conducting telecommunications intercepts for other agencies, but also the fact that henceforth it's going to be on call. And that is the nature of the committee stage amendment that I've circulated, that I hope for support from both sides of the chamber, that at very least, if people are going to be able to call ASIO, and effectively, as the Law Council have warned, create effectively a kind of mercenary agency that would allow ASIO to be on call from other agencies who have the need for telecommunications intercepts or other forms of investigation, whether or not it has anything whatsoever to do with ASIO's responsibilities under their Act. I think that's an extraordinary expansion of ASIO's powers. There's no justification for it. There appears to be a bipartisan consensus to simply let this sail through, and we won't be having it. The Australian Greens certainly will be voting against this bill. as we've not often done on telecommunications interceptions matters, this, I think, is a step vastly too far. We need to be very careful before we expand the mandate of clandestine agencies with very, very sketchy reporting obligations to the people of this country, before we allow their mandate to expand into mainstream law enforcement and indeed tax matters, for heaven's sake. That is where this appears to go. So I'm not sure who the minister representing will be. It may be Senator Wong, but I'll just foreshadow now. I've got a number of questions that I'll be raising in the committee stage about the reasoning behind this bill and about whether our interpretations of how this bill has been drafted are actually correct. And maybe you can disabuse us, I think if it is you, Senator Wong, through you, Chair, of some of our concerns, but we'll wait until the committee stage for that. The amendments to the Telecommunications Interception Act seem to happen fairly frequently. They seem to come through here every couple of weeks, and I'm only exaggerating by a little bit, and there's a creeping expansion of the ability of Australia's intelligence and security agencies and law enforcement agencies to tap our phones, to read our web traffic, and to use all of the tools of surveillance that are used around the world to spy on people, whether in democratic societies or not. And the checks and balances that make us different here in Australia, we suppose and we hope, are things like reporting obligations, and that is in the nature of the amendment that I've circulated. If other agencies are going to be able to call ASIO in well outside its mandated area of expertise as it's described under its Act, then at the very least we need to know how many of those kind of calls were made and how much agency resources are being consumed by that kind of work. And so these are the nature of the questions that I'll be raising in the committee stage, because I don't think we want to create the appearance, and I'm sure this is not the government's intention, of an agency without enough to do, that we've just tripled its staffing complement and yet somehow its very, very serious mandate around thwarting terrorist events before they occur, for example, which I understand is absolutely front and centre of the work of the agency. Do folk just have spare time that they can take phone calls from other ministers and other departments to request for telecommunications intercepts and other services? Is that really the case? Do these people actually have time? And if they do, why are we hiring them in the first place? Why this enormous expansion of ASIO's resourcing if they're then going to be sitting around waiting for phone calls from other ministers and other agencies for help? That, I think, is something that we need to clear up. So we do see creeping expansions through amendments to the Telecommunications Interception Act, through, I think, the quite feeble response that we saw last year in the package of so-called counter-terrorism reforms, which effectively leave the architecture of the Howard-era terrorism laws entirely in place. Some changes here, including some quite important ones, but most of them cosmetic or even making matters worse. All of this in the absence of the officer that was meant to be established, the National Security Legislation Monitor, and we had the word independent installed in the name, to work out for us whether these laws are actually necessary and proportionate. Because nothing that I've said here is intended as disrespect to the work that our intelligence and security agencies do. The flip side, I suppose, of its clandestine nature is that the work is thankless. Some of it is probably pretty dangerous and difficult. And of course, you're not able to go into the newspapers and say what you've been up to. And so none of this is intended by way of disrespect for the core functions of these agencies if, as I'm reading it correctly, it's about preventing acts of domestic or international terrorism. We certainly have, as a party founded on a pillar of non-violence, no problem with that. The problem is with the scope creep that just continues and continues and continues, just a little bit at a time, without any opposition or a voice raised by the opposition in this parliament. And I suppose I shouldn't be surprised by that because they were the ones who set down the architecture that we're currently living under in the rather grim years following the horrors of 9/11. So what we would like to know really, and I look forward to the contributions that the opposition will make and perhaps some clarification in the Minister's closing statements if she's intending on giving them, is what is the purpose of this bill? Why are we so dramatically expanding the mandate of ASIO to allow it into so many other domains with so little description as to the reason or the intended effect? Those are the questions that we hope to answer on the way through this debate, and I will again foreshadow that we will not be voting for this bill until we can be satisfied that it's actually in the nation's interest, that cloudy and hazy concept of the national interest that we never quite seem to get around to defining. I look forward to some of these matters being clarified in the debate that's to come.